Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
Well, we had that magic Saturday night when we say that either clocks spring forward or fall back, and they've fallen back, and now it's just dark. It's dark at an early o'clock. Marcus, what has happened? Why is it dark?
It's winter. I totally missed that it actually changed. I was only reminded by someone last night. I was like, oh, did we? Oh, okay. Fair enough. So now, yeah, it's getting darker quicker, and I'm having 3 more lights in here just to be seen.
Yeah, exactly. But enough about times and darkness. Who's on the show today?
Yeah, so today we have Max Dickins and his book called Improvise. And he is he runs courses on improvisation. He's in the improvisation circuit. And he wrote it with a view on organizations and how I can improvise better and use those kind of characteristics and skill sets and ideas for better teams, organizations, and processes, which was super fun.
And I think it was a really good conversation. I thought it was interesting that his venue is called In the Shadow of the Shard. So he's another good London guy. And of course, we had to talk a bit about cricket because he was really, hell-bent on getting the word cricket, or at least discussion of cricket, into the conversation. So he did that. But what were your takeaways today?
Yeah, he wore the shirt, the suit jacket, didn't he? So I think my big thing was, and I'm really dealing with this, I think, and I have in every project I ever worked in, is iterative cycles, right? So in improvisation, you try a lot of things every day, every night, every couple of minutes. And we know that some organizations are picking up a lot on that, and they're really starting to not just produce faster, but actually in smaller increments, quicker, nimble cycles. And a lot of them don't. And he had a couple of stories about some that do and some that don't. And I find that most interesting because I think it's one of the big characteristics that, right now I'm working on a project where I'm trying to tell the team that the things we're going to do next can be much smaller, and it's an experiment. Those are the two things I'm currently trying to convey. It's like, it's okay to treat it as an experiment, and it's okay to do less. And it's okay if that goes wrong, then actually in 2 weeks' time we can do something else. And that's cool. And everyone's going to be happy. Your manager's going to be happy with that. Your manager's going to understand, and he will be happy that you learn something and you improved and you're closer to getting the actual value in. That is a big, big thing to often bring across. And I'm happy Max talked about it. So that I found really cool. What were your takeaways?
So I love that kind of shortening the feedback cycles and making iterative. So piggybacking on what you were saying as well. The other thing is improvisation is too often seen as being very risky because the outcome is unknown. The outcome is unpredictable. And he made a really good counter argument that says, look, in today's world, doing things in waterfall design in traditional ways, that's where the real risk is. The risk is also being upended by somebody else who is doing iterative improvisation-based cycles. The other thing that I really enjoyed talking about was kind of towards the end, I was asking about how can we use improvisation to deal with some of the polarization that's happening in society and tribalism. And he says, look, for improvisation to work, you've got to have a lot of empathy, and you've got to have a lot of engagement between people with a lot of diversity as well. And I thought both of those were really good. But enough of my whittering on. Why don't we go and talk to Max?
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencastr. We use Zencastr for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencastr is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, wickedpodcast for 40% off. And now the interview.
Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Max Dickins. Hello, Max. Thank you for being on our show.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to chatting about all things improvisation.
Yes, we will. So, as usual, we start at the top. So please tell us who you are and why you wrote the book.
My name's Max Dickins. My background is in professional radio and live comedy, and I co-founded an improv school called Hoopla, which is been going for about 15 years in London. We teach people how to improvise. We have a theatre next to London Bridge in the shadow of the Shard. We put on shows 6 nights a week, and we also work with amazing corporate clients. And I wrote a book called Improvise to take this stuff that we teach, that we perform off stage to help people in their day-to-day life, especially at work.
And what was the inspiration actually to write a book per se? As opposed to, okay, you're doing great classes already, but why try to put all of that into a book? It seems like improv is much more live and interactive.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And there's some stuff you cannot capture on the page when it comes to improvisation. But the reason why I wanted to write it was there's a lot of preconceptions about improvisation, that it's, to use a British phrase, arty-farty, or it's a load of nonsense, right? It's not rigorous. It's just, people pretending to be trees and dancing around, and who cares? And I wanted to try and put together a really clear, compellingly argued and evidence case for how you can use this stuff. So that's why I put it together. I also, and I'm sure lots of your guests have said a similar thing, is that writing a book is a really good way of clarifying your thinking. So one of the things about improvisation is, because it is spontaneous, there's not as many goes to do retakes, but when you write something down, you really see your logic right in front of your eyes, and you can work on it and really clarify what you think about a subject. So that's why I wrote it.
Or in some cases, what I find is I've written it all down. It makes absolutely no sense at all, but writing it down shows me that it makes no sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, what did I read the other day? I thought it was really good. It said that, bad writing is an example of bad thinking, but I don't think you can get your thinking right until you do the bad writing first, right? So, I mean, I don't mind telling people this. The first draft of my book was bad. Right? There's no other way of putting it. It was really bad, especially by standards I set myself. But I don't think the end product would have been what it was if I hadn't done that. And so it's about going through that process. So I think it's a brilliant thing to do. Someone like Amazon, for example, famously do those 6-page memos for the start of every meeting. And the reason they do that is to make the meeting efficient and to lay out the reasoning before you talk about it. But it's also to get the people communicating what they want to happen, to get them super clear on what they're trying to say. And I think there's actually huge value in writing it out, even if your first draft is a complete load of nonsense.
Yeah, I think I relate to that as well, because I think I rewrote my book at least 3 times, and it was horrible to read after the first round. And then when you talk about improvisation as well, and you said, it takes a couple of times. And some people sometimes say as well, when you build anything, you do anything, create anything, oftentimes, it takes about like 7 times till you get it sort of right. And I think, comedy and improvisation in particular has a lot of that. And we know how, comedians tour all the smaller clubs to figure out what works and what doesn't before they go up to Edinburgh or somewhere. And but that is really, really scary for organizations, right? Organizations, and we see this every day in our work, where we work in change, transformation, and innovation, where, I'm trained as a creative and being innovative, and I know that all is experimentation. There's 1% you get right. And that seems to be still today a very scary prospect for organizations. So how do you get this idea of saying, you know what, forget all these processes you can get from Deloitte and McKinsey, and go and improvise? And how do you get to that even first conversation to go, no, trust me, or at least just listen to me, because this is a really great idea?
I think the first thing to do is to overcome some of the unspoken objections, right? So the biggest one is probably that improvising is unpredictable. And of course it is, like you've just said. But I don't think we need any more evidence, do we, to also show that the opposite is as unpredictable, right? The plans don't work. And that's not because people aren't clever or the plans aren't good. It's because the world is bonkers. This is crazy. We're doing this now. The idea we'd be recording this podcast, I'd be working from home, doing something virtually with you 18 months ago. You're in Lisbon, you're in Dalston, I'm in Southwest London. Crazy. I mean, but we've had to adapt to it. And it wasn't built into the original plan, is my point. So I often explain it like this, that there's three sorts of problems that we're faced with in the world, right? And the first one is simple problem. So this is a problem we've seen before, and it's pretty easy to solve, like frying an egg. We all know how to fry an egg, right? Why would you bother to improvise? Waste of time. Just do what works. Then you've got complicated problems. These are problems that someone has solved before, and we know how to do it, but you maybe need some expertise to do it. Like a mechanic can fix my car. I can't do that. I need an expert. But it's a problem that we know the boundaries of. But then you've got complex problems, which are problems that maybe we haven't seen before, or we don't even know the boundaries of what it is. We certainly don't know the solution yet. How do you find that solution? We can't do off the shelf. We have to improvise. And when you explain it in those terms, I think organizations do connect to this idea of, yeah, do you know what? Those are the problems we're faced with, and a different approach is required. I did some work for Unilever once, and fairly recently, and they came to me with this metaphor rather than me giving it to them, and I thought it was brilliant. Is the way they explain it to the leaders they're developing is, we used to work in a world like scripted theatre, right? There was the director at the top, everyone knew their roles, and the game was doing your lines, doing your part the same every night, but doing it a bit better each time, right? Quicker, better. That was the game. But now it's changed, and it's much more like an improvisational theatre troupe, where rather than top down, it's bottom up. We need people on the front line responding to change, feeding upwards. The team rules. We still need leaders to organise people, but it's a completely different model. And when you understand that metaphor, you then see the skill set of improvisation as not being esoteric and niche and bullshit, right? But actually something that is a core competency. And what I hope my book does, and the world of improv does, is kind of break down that competency into some practical skills and mindsets that anyone can learn.
So they say necessity is the mother of all fuck ups, or the mother of all invention, depending on what the situation is. And we are absolutely in the middle of a necessity of change. I also say that we're going to add improvisation to my list of I's. There's improvement, taking something that already works and making it better. Yeah. There's invention, coming up with something completely, utterly new out of the R&D department. There is, innovation, actually coming up with something new that you can actually turn into a profitable business. And there's ideation, which is typically an agency with people sitting around on brightly colored beanbags, coming up with crazy ideas that don't have any value at all.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of differentiate and move improvisation into an innovation flow? What's the connector? What's the initial glue?
So the initial glue, I think, is this. There's two things. One is who does the ideation, who does the innovation. It's groups of people, and they have to unlock each other's knowledge and skills to create value together. Improvisation, in a nutshell, is about people coming together to do that. And there are things that get in the way, and there are things that help, and improv kind of deconstructs that. The second thing, and I'm going to get to in a sec, but I'll share a definition of improv. So improvisation, I define it as the art of acting without a script. It's the art of acting without a script. That happens on stage for comedy all the time. But how much of life is doing that? A lot of it. And you mentioned ideation, innovation. We're solving problems where we don't have the answers yet. So that is an improvisational act. And I think central to that, so coming to the second ingredient I mentioned a moment ago, is that it's about being divergent as well as being convergent. Generally, people in the world of business, because they want to show their expertise, their experience, they're really good at the convergent bit, that side of the diamond, criticizing ideas. And that's a useful thing too. They're not so good at the divergent bit because they won't sit in that not knowing. They won't be flexible. They won't be able to be divergent. And so improvisation is about letting people be in that space together for enough time to get to the innovation, to get to the interesting ideas. And then you may have heard of this already, but the central philosophy of that is this yes and idea, which is accepting and building of contributions. But really what that's about is not just happy clappy. It's about letting go of what's in your head or suspending judgment for a moment. And that definition of intelligence, I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said this, is about holding two ideas in your head at the same time. That's what yes and is. That's what that divergent phase is. And that's how I think it connects to innovation.
And that's a really good explanation. You triggered off on the whole yes and thing. And I've been using yes and for years. The problem I find most recently is that yes and has become so well known, people start spotting it, and it becomes a bit trite or patronizing.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and or let me build on what so and so said, and it becomes almost disingenuous. So how do you get the people in a trusting environment to say, when I say yes and, it's because I'm literally trying to build?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. Something I often say in workshops is that the words aren't important, because you're right. The words do feel a bit patronizing and a bit like, hey, I'm using this tool I've learned. And I can see why people might roll their eyes. And so I think the key thing here is that the point is not to use the tool. The point is the outcome. And the yes and is actually training wheels, right? So we use yes and to get people who are not good at this stuff to actually get in the mindset and use the concept. But then you can just get rid of it. I think it's much more holistic. It's about the spirit of it. And the spirit is this, is when I'm working with you, do I think that on average, you're trying to forward the action with me to be in an exploratory space, or do I think you're not? Now, that doesn't mean you have to say yes and all the time. You have to use the words. It's a sense and a trust that we're doing it together. So it's a more of a holistic thing. And how is that earned? That's earned through us knowing each other and working with each other for a while. And also that I'm getting a sense from you that you're going to be in this space with me and you're not trying to drive status. When we lose trust is that we feel the other person's trying to drive status. And we talk about this a lot in improv. And it's an idea, I think, when you hear about, you see it everywhere, is that almost every interaction is a status exchange. So we often think of status as where you are in a hierarchy. So, hey, I'm the MD or I'm the CEO and I'm the, intern. And it is that. But it's also something we play and something we can give and take from other people. And when I'm with you, do I feel you're pushing your status to reduce mine? Or are we equal here and just playing and exploring? And when I trust that you're in that same space, I don't care if you use the words. I don't care if sometimes you go, no, that's wrong. Because it's about the holistic sense that we're in this together. And if you see shows on stage, I don't really talk about this much in the book because it's maybe muddies the waters, but a really experienced improviser on stage will know that saying no to something or blocking an idea can sometimes be a gift, because it opens up something else, something interesting, another area. But we'd only do that with performers that we know can handle it and trust that we're trying to make the best thing possible here. We're not trying to make them look like a dick.
So I think I want to bring something a bit, maybe not too much offshot, but maybe bring that back here. So, and oddly enough, it's I watched a talk by many years ago, which makes sense if I name the name, by Kevin Spacey. I think it was the Actors Guild. And he talked a lot about the difference between theater and the movies, right? And his main point was essentially that, and I think there's a really interesting parallel here between when you're in the movies, you kind of have these shoots and you show up and you do the 1 minute or 2 minute take, and maybe you do 2 or 3 takes, but that's it. But then it's in the box. So you get this one shot, this one go, and you can revisit it the day after. It's just gone, right? These things don't happen again. And as we know, he's been, working with some really, really good directors. He said, look, when I was doing theater play, actually every day, every evening, you'll try something else. And you get better and better and better. And in the end, he said, after about 2-3 weeks, he got comments back on one of the roles he was doing. It's like, yeah, it's not. Don't try to bring force into through anger. And that was the main feedback he got. And that changed the whole thing. It got more subtle. It got much better. And people liked it more. And he just really improved on this. And he said, that's the big difference between those two things, right? So you're actually in theater, you have the opportunity to iterate every day, because it's not in a box, it's not pinned down, whereas on movies instead. And it feels a bit like in organizations often, we have this movie scenario where you have one go at it, that's it. However, organizations are a little bit shifting through the to the theater thing of experimentation now.
Mm.
So my question is, long story short, have you seen any of that sort of as a parallel or happening more, and therefore your improvisation, because of those fact of experimentation, maybe as terminology, to be more welcome?
Within businesses, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I can name some examples. So Roche, the pharmaceutical company I've done quite a lot of work with, Wise, formerly TransferWise, Spotify, I know, who are not a personal client, but I know they have a similar thing. And what they're doing is changing the structures of teams so that they're cross-functional. They're very much very flat hierarchies. And one of the biggest things is making the feedback loops as short as possible. And so this is the kind of the flip side, right? So behaviors are really important. We're talking about behaviors at the moment, but also how we organize things and structure the environment is important. And they structure it so ideas are coming from everywhere, but also the feedback loops on those ideas are really short. And I think this is a massive thing that people are still in less modern organizations to those. I'm amazed at how slow the feedback loops are. I won't name the company, but there's a massive global brand I've been having meetings with, and it's the agility department. And we have there's 15 people in this department, and we have 100 meetings about the smallest thing. It's just guys, relax. You're hiring an improv guy. You're the agility department, and nobody wants to do anything in a way that's iterative at all. And shortening these feedback loops is massive. Improv is great at this. If you've never seen an improv show, it's made up in the moment. How do we write the script? It's because the audience are reacting with energy, but with laughter or no laughter to what's happening, right? And so that noise or not noise is how we make the decisions. So there's a great thing in comedy, which I think people who haven't seen much comedy might not know. We call it game of the scene, right? So you're doing a scene, you say something, it gets a laugh. In that moment, the performers are going, why is that funny? And once you've worked that out in your head, you're doing more of that each time. You're heightening it, and that becomes what the scene's about. But it's based on the feedback in the moment, right? I'm sure that's the Kevin Spacey idea, Marcus, as well, right? He's getting feedback from the audience each night so he can tweak his approach. That's why improv shows are so agile. But then I flip it to, say, a publishing model. So with my book, I mean, I know you guys have written books and you know this as well. The feedback would be sort of every 6 months in one big bucket of excrement, right? And so you're changing at right angles. So it's the least agile way possible. So going back to Spotify, Wise, these sorts of businesses, we want to shorten those feedback loops and build it in as much as possible. And that's why theatre is so creative and responsive.
I think it's really interesting because I think that, it's a thing where I think feedback loop is interesting because the iterative, experimental thing is slowly becoming a thing. But it needs very nimble teams. As you said, the cycles need to be there, sign off and whatnot. And I've seen my fair share of companies as well who want to do that, and then they're really caught up with that. But sometimes it's about selling that idea to them because they're going to go, well, but we can't do that quickly because then you're doing two small things. Oddly enough, as you said, I think a really good example is in social media. They've done it for a while. I think social media and going viral uses the same mechanic. You have a little thing, you try a couple of hundred things, and one suddenly pops up. And when you have it, you top it up again with little effort, and eventually it breaks through, and it makes the room shout or, goes viral. Do you ever, in that sense, then look at the kind of... Do you ever talk about risk in that sense, right? And failure is probably one aspect of it. Do you ever talk about risk, how that works, instead of taking a big risk with one scripted thing to go into small experiments and having a different dynamic?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And look, I should say there are lower stakes in a live improv show than there are in businesses spending hundreds of millions of pounds on things, right? So I do appreciate that. But I think when we think about risk, trying something out to iterate is a much smaller risk than the kind of opposite approach of spending a long time planning something, investing a huge amount of resource into it, and then getting feedback and going, no one cares, right? That's a much bigger risk. Like, so this is why I'm quite passionate about when people go, oh, it's risky. It's like, you're just ignoring all the evidence in front of us that this kind of old waterfall approach really doesn't work at all. And like often I find this with clients. Like when I'm working with clients, they will give me a brief, but really they don't know what they want until they've seen it. So I build a really, really quick proposal often. And I'm a small business, right? I'm not like some of these massive companies. But then they see it and they'll feedback on the prototype, and that's how I know what they want. But it doesn't happen unless you present them with something rough and ready early on. If I spend a huge amount of time invested in one thing, then I don't get the feedback, and the whole thing takes a lot longer. It's a much bigger risk for me to do it like that. So I think when you make that case and reframe what a risk is, which is going back to what we were saying at the start, right? About what's more risky, planning or improvising, then I think people can see the value.
And I'm happy to say that I see more and more organizations moving towards that iterative, agile approach. Some people picked up the word agile in the boardroom and decided they were going to apply Scrum and that we were going to be an agile organization. And sometimes it's just lip service. But in other cases, I do see teams, like you said, the people on the ground making the decisions that actually have the data to be able to do that. You get an entire chapter in the book called Collaboration. And you were referencing it a few minutes ago when you were talking about status takers and status givers and what are you trying to manipulate the status,
Yeah.
We are in a very interesting place in Western society where polarization is just getting so strong. Whether it's nation states trying to do kind of more protectionism or whether it's even within groups, this whole tribalism thing.
Yeah.
How can we use improvisation or improv to break down some of those walls, break down some of those barriers, and see the benefits of diversity, of collaboration? How can that help? Or can it help?
That's a really brilliant question. That's a really brilliant question. So I think it applies both in and outside of organizations. Let's start with outside because that was kind of the heart of your question. It's all about empathy, and empathy is generated when people mixed. We have polarization because people are separating into camps. I mean, that's literally what polarization is, right? They're separating like files to a magnet. And so they're not mixing and they're not sharing perspectives. When people get together, they realize they've got way more in common. So can improvisation help? I think that the big thing, the case to make, and geopolitically, I don't know if this works, but I think the case to make more basically is to say, if you're going to do anything in your life that is meaningful and complicated, right? So, for example, I mean, climate change is a great example. If we're going to do anything meaningful or complicated, we're going to have to work together because we haven't got all the answers on our own, all the skills, all the knowledge, right? So we often say in an improv troupe on stage, you can't have everyone be the same. We say you need people who are the head of the show. They're sort of clever and they're joining the dots. You need the heart. They've got the emotion in the show, making the stories compelling. You need the pirates who jump on and just screw things up, and they're maniacs and they make it fun, right? The show would not work without each of those elements. And it's about appreciating that and celebrating the different strengths. And I think that has to be communicated more internally in organizations. I think in microcosm, we see this. We get them versus us. So the accounting guys are like, oh, the creatives are crazy and wasting money and pissing it down the toilet. Like, with the marketing, what are they in with their crayons? Like, they don't trust it. And it's the same on the other way around. People are getting annoyed at compliance because nobody mixes. So I think it's a balance between getting people to mix and that the mindsets. But I wanted to share this with you actually because I'm writing another book at the moment, and it's about friendship, actually. And the world expert on friendship is a guy called Dr. Robin Dunbar. He's an evolutionary anthropologist. He's a bit of a genius. And he's got this idea of Dunbar's number, which is that the maximum number of friendships we can maintain. It's a cognitive limit because of our brain, basically. So, and he's looked at armies, he's looked at hunter-gatherer societies, and he's looked at companies like Gore-Tex, for example, and they realized when numbers in offices went above 150, that's when you get the silos. That's when you get them versus us. That's when you get the separation. So on a more practical level, I think it's about how do we structure spaces so that people can meaningfully form relationships. That I don't have a good answer to, but I don't think the answer is just leaving it as it is at the moment. How do you get that meaningful connection that allows empathy at a scale where we're all working remotely and it's all digital? For businesses, that's a huge challenge. And if you exaggerate that over a nation or a continent, that's obviously exaggerated even further. So I'm not sure I've given you an amazing answer there because I don't think there is a good one. But it's about empathy, appreciating strengths and different perspectives. But how do you make that happen? I think it's got to be more of a structural change we go through.
I think it's a very good answer, because I think the whole Dunbar number, and I think I remember it coming up on Facebook a lot when people started to have like hundreds of thousands of friends on Facebook. He said, like, actually the real number you can manage is so much smaller, and beyond that, it doesn't matter. It has no meaning or value. So as usual, we have more questions than time. So here's the last one, sort of. So the one thing about, the power dynamics and the failure and the psychological safety on these things, if you want to do something like improvisation, is there's a lot of talk around leadership being in the position, or still expected to by many people, to have all the answers. As simple as that. Very classic old model, very, very outdated. But how, when you go in somewhere and say, look, it's improvisation, actually improvisation tells you one thing, that there won't be just a small number of people who has all the answers. It's actually a collective effort to experiment, go about. And if we're lucky, we find something today. And if not, it's tomorrow or in a week. But the certainty is there. We'll find something as long as we go about it in that collaborative way, but not listening to one person alone, because one person alone can't drive the show. It just doesn't work like that. It's not that much fun. How do you go about then with leadership to go, can you step back, or can you communicate different to, the setup? I'm probably talking about the context of which you would go about and say, change the dynamics, stop leading, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it's a really good question. I think a lot of some people with certain personalities, maybe more alpha macho personalities, find it harder than others. I think the thing to say is that your job, what is an outstanding leader, is changed. And it's not that you're being a lazy leader or a bad leader by stepping back. It's about the job of leadership has changed, which is you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You have to set up a context where the team or the organization is the smartest it can possibly be. That is outstanding leadership. That is alpha macho leadership, because over the medium to long term, you're going to see better results. Let me just I'm going to give you two examples here of, I think, people who do it really well. One, he's a guru from business, and one is a sports guy. So Frank J. Barrett, jazz musician. I know a previous guest on your podcast has spoken about improvisation and jazz and organizations. But this guy, Frank J. Barrett, he says the job of the leader is not just to get out of the way. It's about guided autonomy. You need to provide great clarity, great strategy, and feedback all the way through the process. But you also need to provide flexibility. So he says minimal structures, maximal autonomy, right? And so when you set up that environment, you are going to see the benefits of it, and it's going to make you great as a leader in the long run. And it's Frank J. Barrett has this other phrase, I have it in the book, called "say yes to the mess." And it's an emotionally difficult challenge. If you've got shareholders, it's even trickier. But if you can say yes to the mess over the medium term, that process is going to produce value. And I think the key thing is actually how you respond in small increments, because you need to create this as an emotional culture. And that's about conversations. It's about the speeches you make. It's about how you react in the moment to people to create that culture. And here's this second example I was going to share with you then. and it's the England cricket captain. So you can probably tell I'm wearing this tedious tweed jacket. I like cricket and I'm English. What an awful prick I am. Anyway, he won the World Cup with the England cricket team, and the England cricket team used to be terrible because they were really conservative and boring. Everything was very much, we take it really seriously, and all the other teams were going faster because they were taking more risk, scoring more runs in the white ball, what they call the 50-over tournament. Owen Morgan came in and said, look, we're going to lose some games in the short run, but what I don't want us to lose is by playing it safe. And they took some hammerings, but he was just stoic, dead face. We'll get there. You've got to treat the failures in the same way as the successes. By the end, England were by far the best team on the planet. And the players would come out and with things written on their backs saying, fuck it. A guy called Joss Butler had fuck it written on his back, walking out to bat for England. Millions of people watching him. Fuck it. That was the spirit created in the group by how that leader created that environment. They are a world-class organisation now. It's not about mediocrity. It's about asking the question, what is the environment that's going to produce an outstanding outcome over the medium term? And then what emotional culture do we create? And it's small things. It's how you react to those risks and those failures. And I thought of that today, knowing I was going to come on the podcast, because they're doing a 20-over World Cup and they're 5 from 5 in that at the moment, 2 years after they won the last one. So this stuff works, but it's about bravery and about how you react in the small moments, not just the big strategic PowerPointy bits. It's how you react in the small moments.
Yeah, I think that is a great answer to the last question. So all I can say is thank you so much, Max, for your insights, for being here, answering our questions and all the stories you had. And thank you so much for your time. That was brilliant.
Hey, I loved it. Thanks, guys. And I'm glad I managed to crowbar cricket into an answer about business and improvisation.
And I didn't manage to crowbar Stephen Colbert into this. Next time.
Well, you just have, I suppose. We'll keep that in the edit.
I know. That's how it works, doesn't it? Thank you.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.